Welcome to The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Syrett. RFID chips, or radio frequency identification chips, are tiny wireless devices embedded in tags that can transfer data from the tag attached to an object, like a new pair of shoes. Chips can be the size of a grain of rice and are incorporated in just about every consumer product. They can even be implanted in pets for identification. The RFID tag can be affixed to an object and used to track and manage inventory, assets, people. For example, it could be affixed to a car, computer equipment, books, mobile phones. But the ubiquitous nature of these RFID chips have some worried that they might one day be used to track and control humans. One blogger recently referred to RFID chips as Big Brother in a small package, and left him wondering if we will one day be constantly tracked through our clothes, shoes, or even our money. On this episode of The Conspiracy Show, we take a look at RFID chips. We're about to hear from several researchers, journalists, and authors who share that blogger's concerns, and they warn that we're being tracked through our personal possessions, including our credit cards and our cell phones. How long, they wonder, before all citizens are urged to implant RFID chips under our skin, giving police constant surveillance of every one of us. If all this is starting to sound like a scene out of Minority Report, just hold on. Because our skeptic thinks the RFID chip is a very positive technological development that will benefit consumers and retailers alike. Me? I just want the truth, and I'm willing to follow it wherever it leads. It is time to redefine reality. Genetic enigma or a human alien hybrid? That's how cynical I am now about the process. Mainstream media, they've thrown in the towel. Weather patterns created by they're going to make it go away. Has been engineered by the Illuminati.
There's no doubt.
Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin would have given their left arm for such a surveillance system. Now, the RFID chips are already in almost every piece of clothes you have. So, having them in your body is not going to really change it that much more. But it's just that downward slope toward there is no privacy. At the end of the day, if we ever have a government that wishes to go after any part of the population, it will be virtually impossible for someone to evade it. We are such a surveillance society now, Richard, that our life and our privacy is simply not our own.
The typical RFID tag looks like a grain of rice. It's basically a computer chip with a radio antenna. Now, they can be made small as a grain of sand, and who knows going forward what forms they're going to take, but right now the typical RFID chip looks like a grain of rice. There's been a series of fears that have driven all kinds of policies in the West, and so I can see that eventually perhaps a fear is used to tag everybody.
Walmart in 2004 demanded that every company of the 250,000 that was supplying products to them had to have radio frequency ID chips in their products or they wouldn't buy. At that point, everyone had to put them in everything because there's no point in putting them in for Walmart and not putting them in for everything else. There are now literally billions of RFID chips that are created each and every year. They're in thoroughbred horses, they're in cattle, they're in chickens, they're in everything now. When you go to the cash register and give them your Visa, MasterCard, or your debit card, they now have your ID into the massive retail wholesaler database somewhere in the United States, top security, underground. It holds all these RFID numbers. Then my name or your name is then connected to that product so that when you walk into our airport, bus station, train station, at any type in the future, scanners in the floor and in the walls, in the doors of the airport will, without your knowledge or awareness, be scanning your body and it will scan your belt and find that RFID number. Those chips now are so small that they're virtually invisible. They're in the labels of every piece of clothes you wear. They're built into the soles of your shoe. They're built into virtually every product you buy. Since 2001, you can basically count that everything you buy, from pharmaceuticals to groceries to any type of retail product, has an RFID chip in it. And so we have a situation where, without our knowledge, our lives are no longer our own. In the book, you probably notice I said, you have no privacy, get over it.
Wow, you've got UPS, Nestle, Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Home Depot. More and more companies with each passing day are jumping onto the RFID wagon. Because there is no law to indicate whether or not an RFID is present, as the consumer basically opens themselves up to data mining simply based on the fact that this chip can be read at a distance and without the consumer knowing. So you start to encroach on a person's privacy. You can extrapolate and mine specific data about the individual, certain habits, certain specific behaviors that they might have, where they shop, so on and so forth.
Are governments using RFID tags?
Sure. I mean, here in Ontario, Canada, back in 2009, they introduced the enhanced driver's license, which contains the RFID chip. And you've got countries which use RFIDs in their passports, like the United States, Spain, Norway, Ireland. You know, you've got the Canada Postal Service, the United States Postal Service, the United States Department of Defense, the Canadian Armed Forces all utilize RFIDs. So the governments are definitely using them, yes.
For the first time in human history, governments, whether dictatorially minded or just total security minded because of 9/11 and the Patriot Act and those kind of things, are now able to surveil the location and the identity of every single citizen, visitor. And so we have a situation where, without our knowledge, our lives are no longer our own. In the book, you probably notice I said, you have no privacy, get over it.
Think about how they encroach on our privacy. And then, of course, if you look at the applications, I mean, they definitely are a threat to our freedom of assembly and association, simply by being able to monitor who's in contact with who, where they're associating, when they're assembling, for how long, so on and so forth. So I would definitely say that RFIDs are a threat to our civil liberties.
I don't really have any concerns about RFID chips. It's just another technology for gathering information quickly. What sort of information is exposed is a policy question, and we need to have the laws in place to protect people's privacy. Currently, the way RFID chips are used is they read from you, or from whatever device, a number, and that number is an index into a database. So getting a hold of the number is useless unless you have access to the database itself. So currently, RFID tags are not used really to track people at all. It's really just products, and even individual products are not really tracked using RFID. So I don't see there's any risk involved with this sort of thing. In fact, if you used loyalty cards and give you whatever 5% off, or you get points or something like that, that's actually handing information to the company that they use for marketing purposes. They want to know buyer behaviors, and that's helpful for them for making marketing decisions.
What is the range of these tags? Can they be tracked, for example, by satellite?
In order to read an RFID tag today, you need to be 20 feet or closer. For instance, if the day comes where everything in your house has RFID tags in it, and I'm a thief and I want to choose what I'm going to steal, which house I'm going to break into, the RFID reader that I would need at this point to read through the walls of your house would be so powerful that it would pop the popcorns on your shelf. There are cargo ships that are equipped with RFID tags that are battery powered, and they can be read from a satellite.
They could not be tracked by satellite. The range of RFID tags, well, it depends on what kind. There are a couple different general kinds. There's passive and active. So the passive ones, they don't require a battery source, so they're good for example, my cat has one. So those ones typically are a few centimeters to maybe 10 feet. You have to be fairly close to pick up those. The other ones that have a battery attached, like the transponder in your car to take a toll road, for example, they're attached to your car's power system, so they can afford to transmit a lot further. Those are active RFID transponders, and those can be up to about 100 meters. So in terms of tracking, I can see where the confusion comes from, because an active RFID transmitter could be used in a warehouse, for example, to triangulate where a particular pallet is, let's say. RFID tags have nothing to do with GPS. It's a completely different system, and the satellites are way out of range for using RFID.
There are medical associations that are pushing for laws that tag children at birth. So from the moment you're born, you are incorporated inside of a system that is not your family. In this case, you'll be tagged like the Borg in Star Trek. The main purpose of tagging human beings is security. What we're told is that if you have a tag underneath your skin and you have a child, the child can be retrieved. If there's an older person who has Alzheimer's and gets lost, they can be found. If you are in an accident far from home, this tag will then give them a code that they can put in a database that opens up your medical files and can save your life. These are the arguments that are being promoted when it comes to tagging human beings. And it's very compelling. The problem, of course, is where it could lead, such as the surveillance of the population.
Can they be implanted under the skin?
RFID chips can definitely be implanted under the skin. Back in 2004, the FDA had approved consumer implants. And in the same year, there was a nightclub in Barcelona which actually offered RFID chips to their VIP clientele. Line bypass, access to the VIP lounges, a debit account from which they could pay for their drinks were all aspects to entice the club goers. So they have been doing this for quite some time now.
It's true that in the United States and in Canada, the medical community is endorsing implantable chips inside of humans. Lives are going to be saved, essentially is the core of the argument. It's true, but it opens the floodgate to all kinds of other possibilities. It also desensitizes the population to the whole concept of being tagged. There are medical associations that are pushing for laws that tag children at birth. So from the moment you're born, you are incorporated inside of a system that is not your family. Kind of like having a citizenship number where you are a person of the Republic, so to speak. In this case, you'd be tagged like the Borg in Star Trek kind of tags. And that really is very dangerous.
So there are good things about implantable RFID tags in a person. So for example, I gave the example of my cat having an implanted RFID tag in case it's found dead or something. They can at least identify it. Let's suppose you're in a car accident, you have no identification on you, and the ambulance shows up and they want to help you without knowing who you are. It can be a lot more difficult, a lot more complicated to treat you. But let's say you've got hemophilia, which is the disease where your blood doesn't coagulate. That's an important piece of information to have. And if they can find out quickly who you are, even if you're unconscious, and access your medical records, that could be hugely helpful. It could save your life.
Do you think that RFID chips are, in fact, the mark of the beast?
The RFID could be the mark of the beast. I mean, if you look at the Bible, more specifically the book of Revelations, it talks about a time where an individual will not be able to buy or sell or trade anything unless they bear this mark, which will be located in either their right hand or their forehead. And if you think about how we've been slowly creeping towards a cashless society, And if you think about how we've been conditioned over the years to simply swipe a card or to just tap a card, I mean, all you got to really do now is just remove the card altogether. So I can see it happening.
Well, certainly something like implantable RFID chips, or the next generation or two from that, would answer to the prophetic description from Revelation 13. In the power of the Antichrist, he rises to power in Europe and then takes over the whole world. The people will accept this technology innocently. They'll put in the encryption that prevents a lot of fraud and identity theft that now goes on. I believe we're going to get to the point that in many Western societies, cash will not be used. It'll all be digital. And once this system exists and people have graduated to a chip beneath the skin, then basically all the Antichrist government would have to do is say, yeah, come down to your local city hall in the next 30 days and we will add 666 to your already existing number. And it could happen just in a matter of months. Everyone would be, because the system would already exist technologically, but also within the body, innocently.
Jeffrey, I think you know where I'm going with this. RFID chips implanted in the palm and used as a method of payment sounds a lot like the mark of the beast foretold in Revelations. Your thoughts?
I don't think it's the mark of the beast. We've been implanting devices into people for years, decades. You know, new hip joint or a pacemaker. That's nothing new. Implanting devices is nothing new. And marking on people's bodies, I mean, body art, tattoos, piercings, and that sort of thing. None of this is new.
If the day comes where we have chips in our hands that can be used for commerce, it does sound like a passage from the book of Revelation that points to a mark. And what makes the mark of the beast is not only its use, but the decree that puts it into place. There must be this final world leader that is to be humbled by the second coming of Christ, and the order must directly come from him, that such a mark be planted in people. Once that is there, in addition to the existence of such a technology inside of human beings, once those two pieces of the puzzle fall into place, yes, one could identify it as the mark of the beast, indeed, yes.
I try my hardest to avoid purchasing products from any of the large corporations, but even more so to remove these products from my daily life that do contain the RFIDs. I mean, what's the point of supporting something that's ultimately out to enslave me? I think what we can do as individuals to slow or even potentially stop this RFID movement would be to boycott the companies which essentially use the RFIDs in their products and packaging, and let them know that we as individuals and consumers don't necessarily like this trend or the direction that it's headed. I try my hardest to avoid purchasing products from any of the large corporations, but even more so to remove these products from my daily life that do contain the RFIDs. I mean, what's the point of supporting something that's ultimately out to enslave me?
It's not reasonable to think that governments would force people to be chipped. First of all, that's a huge expense, and for what the government would get out of it is there's just no way to justify it. They don't really care that much about tracking people. And anyways, if they want to track certain behaviors, there are all sorts of other things. You know, we have passports and we have driver's license, and there's just no reason for it. It'd be a huge expense. It would, getting an implanted RFID tag has medical risks as well. The government, you know, would be on the hook for anything that happens there. I would say that's not reasonable. It just wouldn't be useful. What would it be used for?
Would you be willing to be chipped for medical purposes?
Sure. I mean, it's all a matter of risk versus benefit, and if I'm convinced that the benefit to me outweighs the risk, sure, I'd get chipped.
I believe that we should be talking to our politicians in whatever country you are. Ask for laws to be set up to prevent the misuse of information that is gathered through RFID chips. And I think we need some kind of restriction, some kind of board super review to watch the watchers. Because right now they're operating really without any hindsight, without any oversight, and I think that is dangerous with such a powerful technology that is transforming our society.
Let's say one day, not too long from now, it'll be possible for the authorities to track RFID chips by satellite. Would you have an RFID chip implanted in an elderly relative suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia if it meant the police could track them in case they wandered off? What about your child, in case, God forbid, they went missing? What if you were told you would no longer have to carry cash and worry about getting robbed? Just implant a debit chip under the skin in the palm of your hand and scan it whenever you want to make a purchase. Would you do it? Finally, listen to this verse from the book of Revelations and see if it sounds eerily familiar. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666. And now, I'd like to know what you think. You can email me through the website, theconspiracyshow.com. In the meantime, don't be afraid.